Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with the Ogre Kingdoms Q&A. I hope you're all doing well. We should be back to the point where I'll be putting these out on a daily basis, now that everything from the Warden and the Paunch has kind of calmed down. Unless something comes up, but we'll play it by ear. But I was able to get a ton more questions answered, a good like 10 pages, so we are slowly but surely nearing the end of our little adventure here in the Ogre Kingdoms, but we still got like 10-20 episodes left to go, so we're not that close to the end. In any event, let's go ahead and get started. Our first question today comes from Thomas Weaver, and he asks, what would happen if an ogre ate troll meat? Also, this might be kind of a dumb question, but is the Greyman an actual god? Or is it just a pit they believe to be a god? Does it actually exist? Okay, so we've kind of touched on these, but just a quick recap of that. Ogres have no issue digesting troll meat. Their system is able to handle it, and they're able to digest it faster than it can regenerate in their guts. Ogres are not going to be the ones that have problems with the likes of troll food. As for the Great Maw, yes, it is absolutely a god. It has permanently affected the ogres. Of course, we went really in depth in it on a few episodes back. And it has the ability to bless its followers with magic and some other stuff, so absolutely. That being said, it is the only physical god in Warhammer Fantasy, in that of all the gods that everyone worships, it's the only one that actually has a body in the physical realm, being a miles-wide, giant, fleshy pit in the ground full of teeth, tentacles, and God knows what else. Next question. Duan Epps. Do the ogre firebellies draw their magic from the winds or directly from the maw itself? Appreciate the effort and quality that you make. Okay, so firebellies draw their magic purely from the winds of magic, but they're inspired by and direct their faith towards the Firemouth, which is that massive and active volcano near the middle of the Mountains of Morn. This fervent belief in the active volcano taps into and basically draws upon the passionate wind of Akshi, and especially because the volcano, being a volcano, is bound very heavily to the wind of fire, and the winds of fire tend to pool in areas like volcanoes, which if you're able to tap into the winds at all, you're going to naturally be able to engage with that wind through that experience. Also, fun fact, for those who are actually wondering why the Firemouth is considered a god, beyond the fact that it's just a big scary volcano, the ogres actually believe that the Firemouth is the angry offspring of the Great Maw and the Sun. So there's a terrifying concept, but that explains probably why they have so much respect for it. And it also should be noted that while the firebellies are pulling from the wind of Akshi, they cannot use fire magic without the blessing of the Firemouth. So it seems to be that when they go through all of their crazy rituals to earn the blessing, which the blessing basically builds up to them drinking a thing full of lava without it killing them, if they successfully accomplish that task, they literally they basically become embodiments of the wind of fire, to the point where they're able to breathe fire on command and summon, and that doesn't even require magic. They can just do that. Or it is magical, but it does not require them to use the winds of magic. It's like they almost store it inside themselves, like a bulwark of magical power they can draw on. So they're pretty scary. It's even, although childish, it's actually very well noted that firebellies can have literally dangerously explosive flatulence, which sometimes comes up when they're visiting other ogre tribes. Next up, we've got Jonathan Anton Ager. He's got a couple questions, so we'll just tackle these one at a time. First one, how common are Chaos Ogres? Very, very rare, compared to regular ogres at least. Even large Chaos armies struggle to have enough Chaos Ogres to form a reasonably sized regiment. It has to be like a really powerful Chaos army that is like so strong that they're able to impress the ogres enough for the ogres to want to join them for a long period of time, as opposed to like just attacking them. So it's pretty rare. Most ogres don't bother themselves with chaos. Next question he has: what do Chaos Warriors and the Dark Gods think of the ogres? For the warriors, they appreciate anything that is willing to serve the Dark Gods and proves itself exceptional at causing massive amounts of damage and death on like a pretty easy basis. Ogres, of course, excel at particularly brutal forms of warfare and find themselves eagerly welcomed or challenged by the mortal servants of chaos. But a lot of the times, the Chaos Lord is just going to take, anything and everything he can get. The gods themselves seem to favor ogres every once in a while. They're definitely not their favorite race, likely due to the fact that they are so naturally resistant to chaos. But at least they like them well enough that if an ogre impresses them, they are willing to bless them with mutations and with their actual marks. So it's possible for an ogre to get the mark of Tzeentch or Chaos or Khorne or Slaanesh. Any deeper thoughts about that the Dark Gods have on the ogres is completely unknown. Those capricious entities very rarely have any documented, detailed thoughts on particular races unless they have like a long history together, like Slaanesh with elves or Nurgle with dwarves. A lot of these we've already answered. Okay, so the rest of these we've already answered. Thanks for the question, dude. Appreciate it. Excentro, what do ogres least like to eat? Probably the thing the ogres least like, besides stuff that would be really tasteless, like stone or wood. I would say things that you would expect them to eat, but they least like and will only eat if they're desperate, are honestly Gnoblars. Gnoblars are so stringy and just not worth any of the effort that's why they were able to develop the relationship they have with the ogres in the first place. It is noted that the only reason ogres put up with Gnoblars and didn't just immediately devour their entire species is because they are very unsatisfying to consume. They're very bony, they don't have any meat, they barely any meat on them, and they don't taste very good. So that would probably be their least favorite thing, because ogres are known for eating some pretty foul stuff with not any concern whatsoever. They'll eat like Nurgle creatures that are pussy and slimy and all that stuff, and they're just like, that wasn't too bad. So no. Next question. Shane is Imperium. What drove the ogres to be as they are now? I know they were made by the old ones and were part of the Great Plan. And then they had that stuff with the Great Maw. They were part of the old ones' plan. What drove them to be a race of destruction? So basically what caused the ogres to go from being like potentially a race of order to being a neutral, because they're not a destruction race. In Warhammer Fantasy, we have a very strict classification system of order and destruction, which are... Order is typically like races that seek to build and create, whereas destruction races tend to be those that either destroy or they rely primarily on taking from other civilizations in order to survive. But ogres don't fit in either of those categories. They and the Tomb Kings alone are considered true neutral. They don't really side with anyone. They can fight for good or for evil. They can, live in harmony with certain races, or they can be a total nightmare and like an apocalyptic threat. So, but generally what turned the ogres very heavily from like a kind of nasty order faction to being neutral was the Great Maw and the relationship it had on them. But you can watch next episode for all those details. Or last episode, sorry. Joseph Reiter. Ogres are known for eating other beings and races, but what about the other way around, and what do the ogres think about being eaten themselves? Ogres don't have a problem with it. It's a totally normal part of their culture. They have a very strict belief that the strong will devour the weak. That way the strong can survive and continue to push forward. So something eating them, not considered a huge deal unless it's like attacking them directly in their camps, in which case, you know, it's a threat and they have to deal with it. But ogres do not hold any special animosity towards like large monsters or greenskins or something that, you know, would eat an ogre. Next up, David Orozco. What do ogre women look like and what do they do? No idea. We've never seen any artwork or a model of an ogre woman ever. we've seen an ogre bull dressed as a woman, but I am fairly confident he's a male that just dressed up in drag essentially because he saw, I can't remember exactly the details of the story behind this particular model, which I'll try and show an image of here. But basically, if I recall correctly, he was in the Empire or somewhere, and this ogre, like, witnessed a wife, like, beating the crap out of her husband or something, because of something he did. And the ogre was, like, so impressed by the woman, that he immolated her, essentially. But, yeah, we've never even seen one. And we talked a lot about them previously, but they basically seem to focus mostly on like reproductive stuff and child rearing, but they absolutely would have to pull their weight when it comes to hunting and fighting threats, or, you know, if the tribe's on the move. Next up, Jake Ortman. He's got 2 questions. We'll tackle these one at a time. So I've read that ogres were designed by the old ones to be immune to chaos corruption, but I'm a bit confused as to the details surrounding this fact. I know that in 8th edition there were chaos ogres, some of which I vaguely remember sporting some kinds of mutation. It would be great if you could elaborate on the relationship between ogres and chaos. Sure. So first of all, just to be clear, ogres and halflings were designed to be resistant to chaos, not immune to chaos. Immunity to chaos does not really exist. There are creatures that are functionally immune to it, which the only ones that are a playable race are the Lizardmen. But even Lizardmen can be physically corrupted. Like, they can be mutated by getting hit with, like, a powerful spell or a warpstone bullet or stuff like that. Like, they can still be mutated by a substantially corruptive force. And the same applies to ogres and halflings. It's not that ogres cannot be mutated or cannot fall to chaos. It's that it takes a significant amount of chaos corruption in order to cause them to mutate or to, like, warp their very souls. That being said, there are tons of places or substances in the Warhammer world that can accomplish this. Whether it's, you know, a great example is that when the Great Maw impacted the planet, and, you know, being a giant warpstone meteor, it threw up, like, a bunch of warpstone dust into the upper atmosphere. So when the ogres went east and they went all the way up into the ancient giant lands, they were way too high up. Because the ancient giant lands are by far the greatest mountain range in Warhammer Fantasy. Like, they make other mountain ranges look like hills. And, like, they are so tall that there's, like, a completely different environment at the top. Like, they have their own plateaus that are above the clouds, where the ancient Sky Titans had, like, their empire. So, but when the ogres originally went up there, they tried living there for a little while, but they realized that there was, like, something weird, and there's a lot of, like, shimmering lights in the sky and all this stuff, and it was basically that there was so much warpstone hanging around in the atmosphere, just fine particles of dust, that it would start to mutate them. So most of the ogres pieced out further west. And eventually wound up in the Mountains of Morn. But the ones that stayed turned into Yetis, because chaos corrupted to the point where they literally turned into a completely new species. So, there you go. And then your second question says, a bit tangential, but somewhat related. I'm curious about the extent to which those races that are immune, but we know you mean as immune as you can be, to chaos corruption are indeed immune. Let's say if a powerful Lord of Change were to blast an ogre with raw chaos energy, would the ogre be mutated or not, or would he just die outright? So like I said, nothing is immune to deadly amounts of warping energy, especially when you're dealing with the demons of Tzeentch. The lore of Tzeentch, if it strikes you directly, the lore of Tzeentch specifically revolves around mutation. So if you get hit by something, like the purple flame of Tzeentch or the orange flame, I can't remember all the, I think it's the violet flame of change or something like that. But there's a couple of them that I don't care who you are or what you're made out of, that stuff's gonna mess you up. So like ogres, dwarves, and lizardmen are very resistant to forms of foul magic like that. But if you get hit by something that powerful, it's going to result in absolutely horrific mutation, likely followed by death. If you're super unlucky, however, some of these individuals, even a dwarf, you know, who's very resistant to magic, or an ogre that's very resistant to chaos, if you get hit by the lore of Tzeentch, you might get so overwhelmed by mutations that you basically turn into a chaos spawn. Like, you're growing extra limbs and mouths and eyes, and all of your regular organs are getting shifted around, and your skeleton pops out of your body in weird ways, and like everything's being rearranged, and you're growing tentacles, and part of you is on fire, and maybe you're spewing acid from a couple of new orifices you have on your arm, like just crazy shit. You'll turn into a chaos spawn and just start attacking your former allies, completely insane and being unable to control yourself, which is pretty horrifying. So nothing is immune to chaos. That's like one of the most important things I could ever relay to people, and why chaos is so sinister is nothing is immune. There are many things that can hold it back, or maybe are so tenacious and tough that it takes a hysterical amount of chaos energy to warp them. But but nothing is truly immune. Not even the old ones themselves were truly immune. That's why they were run off or killed. You know, we're not sure exactly what happened to them, but that's why they lost that war. Next up, Dreadneys the Eternal. Who is the greatest ogre tyrant to ever live? That depends on how you define greatness. In terms of raw power or intelligence, I would say that Grease's Goldtooth is like the greatest ogre tyrant ever. In terms of like impressive feats, probably Thug the Fist. Thug the Fist was the first ogre to ever become over tyrant of the Ogre Kingdoms about 3,000 years ago, and he's also the first over tyrant / famous ogre who acknowledged the Firemouth as a god, and when it erupted, he was like, that means we need to go fight, and like led like a massive invasion of a bunch of nearby lands and curb stomped a bunch of people. He's long dead, but you know, that was a crazy long time ago, but he's worth noting. Another contender I could say for like the greatest ever would be Bullock Knifefinger. Bullock Knifefinger is really famous for being the one who tracked down and killed the last of the Sky Titans, or the last one ever seen. Basically, like a good while after the war in the sky, there was a single Sky Titan who was seen wandering around the Mountains of Morn, and Bullock was the one who led his tribe to track it down, and he also slew it, killed it in combat, and his tribe was able, I think his tribe was fed for like the entire tribe was able to feed on just the Sky Titan's corpse for like a full month or something. And then your second question was, how big was the land he conquered? So I'm guessing you're asking what's the largest empire owned by a tyrant? And that would probably go to Greasus. Greasus has achieved the largest swath of land currently that we have any records of, as he technically dominates the entirety of the Ogre Kingdoms and a substantial amount of he owns a good bit of the Eastern Darklands that borders up to the Chaos Dwarves domain, and he also owns a significant amount of the land south of the Mountains of Morn. So like Noblar country, there's a couple of ogre tribes that live in those like forests and foothills and stuff, and they all answer to Greasus. So he has the largest ogre kingdom we've ever seen and have ever heard of, to the point that it's, despite being so massive, it's still not enough for him, and he wants to expand further. But I'll put up a map right here that you can see of the Ogre Kingdoms, and you'll note that there's an area marked in red, and that red area, which it makes up a pretty significant part of the Mountains of Morn, which is like right in the center, that entire space is only owned by Greases himself, so the Goldtooth tribe. So that's not the land he owns as Over Tyrant, that's the land he owns as a regular Tyrant, because that's like their space. And considering that most ogres own, like, they take a valley and then as far as they can see in their valley, that's their domain, that is an insane amount of space, which he almost assuredly has gotten by just clobbering the hell out of anyone that disagreed with him. Then your last question will be, who do the ogres fight the most? Nowadays, Warriors of Chaos. Probably. If I had to guess. I would say Warriors of Chaos pretty reliably. Maybe demons. One of those two. They're before, like, right at the start of the reign of Greases, I would say that most of their battles were against the Greenskins, but Greases Goldtooth is like his crowning achievement to claim the title as Over Tyrant. Basically, his big accomplishment was that he crushed the Black Orcs in the Mountains of Morn and basically wiped out any chance they had at being a rival nation. So they're not really a problem anymore because they got wiped out pretty hard. So I would say in the modern, like 2520, the modern year, the biggest problem for the Ogre Kingdoms is chaos. Next up, we've got Brian Ray. Do ogres build their homes / cities, or do they live underground? Do they have an architectural style that you could describe? That depends on the tribe in question. Most tribes live above ground, out in the open, in large camps in the valleys between the various peaks of the Mountains of Morn, and they use tent-based structures crafted from animal hides and bones. Granted, these are from the hides of like mammoths or thunder tusks and other like genuinely colossal creatures. So these tents are very, very big. They're these massive structures, and usually what they'll do is they'll have like a very crude form of lumber crafted from mornwood, which is it's a type of pine tree that grows in the Mountains of Morn. Is like the only tree that can survive in the Mountains of Morn. And basically most of their structures will revolve around the concept of you just have like a bunch of those really big sticks. If you're a particularly wealthy ogre or you're on some like kind of nasty type of terrain, you might have a platform of mornwood and then you'll have the tent on top of it. But ultimately they prioritize designing their camps and structures on the concept of being nomadic. So very rarely will ogres ever build something that's like permanent. Like you're almost never going to see ogres put together something that is not meant to ever move. They do that sometimes, but it's rare. Most of the time they build buildings or, you know, little kitchens or whatever where it can allow them to move around on a regular basis. That way they can follow the food source, or they can avoid getting stuck in one location so they can kind of resist that constant whispering of the Great Maw. But there are exceptions. While they don't have traditional cities or permanent structures, with some rare exceptions, there are some ogres who do have actual like stagnant homes who live in like caves. And these are typically like the scariest ogre tribes because they live way up in the peaks to basically show off how awesome and powerful they are. They live up in those super hostile cold environments, and they're constantly battling against monsters and other nightmares to keep control of like the best caverns so that they can live and thrive up there. But that's pretty rare. Outside of that, it is, despite their nomadicism, sometimes the ogres will set up fortifications. They're not really cities, they're more of colossal forts. And these they do make. You know, we talked about the one that was in the Grey Mountains. Fort... Oh, gosh, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head now. But we talked about it, I think, last episode. But they do have, like, a big fortress there. But for them, a fortress is more of a place where they can control who comes in and out. like a valley or a particularly large vale in a mountainous area. And what they'll do is they'll roll like really, really big boulders to create a natural defense system. So like barriers or walls, boulders that are way too big for anyone to reasonably climb over unless you're like a very skilled climber, and monsters can't just like slam into them to move them out of the way. And what they'll do is they'll traditionally, if they're setting up a fort or a trade post, especially in like passes that travelers go through, that's how ogres like to extort people, is forcing you to go through their turf, and that way they can charge you a lot of money. And these structures will be really, really crude. It'll be like stacks of boulders, and if there are walls between those, they're almost entirely going to be made out of like the bones of really colossal beasts or monsters. There are some ogre bases or fortresses that if you were to visit them, you basically would run into a pretty impenetrable wall of like just stacked fangs or rib cages or vertebrae of different massive monsters that you could not hope to move. And when you got to the entrance, it'd be like a big stack of rocks and other stuff. And then you'd probably, once you wandered in, all of the structures they have would be made out of wood, especially Gnoblars. Gnoblars are very, very big on just stacking lots of random garbage, scraps, that the ogres typically don't use for their own means. So they use they use a ton of lumber, and then like various things they steal from other cultures, other armies that the ogres like completely smash. The Gnoblars will take all their stuff and basically use it to create shanty towns among all of the ogre tents and stuff. So it kind of gives the illusion of a city, but you'd probably be very impressed at how quickly they could pack it up and go if they needed to. Then we already answered that, so thanks for your questions. Corrupt Moon 0605, just want to let you know I saw your question, but we already answered it. Jurnax Incorporated. How often do ogres come in conflict with the Lizardmen? If so, who typically has the edge in that conflict? I would imagine eating a stegodon would be quite filling for an ogre. It is rare that... it's rare that anybody fights the Lizardmen, but it's pretty rare for the ogres and the Lizardmen to cross paths. However, it does happen occasionally. Generally, battles against the Lizardmen do not go well for ogres. It is a very difficult matchup for them, mainly because ogres rely very much on their natural toughness of their skin and like their massive strength and bodies to be able to overwhelm their opponents. But Lizardmen have some pretty nasty counters to that, between the fact of the giant dinosaurs, which are apex predators and can absolutely go toe-to-toe with the giant monsters the ogres rely on. But then you also have skinks. Skinks are a really big problem for ogres. Ogres do not wear armor. They very, very rarely wear anything protecting their big chests or their arms or their legs or even their faces. Like, they're just exposed most of the time. Even Iron Guts, who are like the most elite form of ogre when it comes to wearing armor, they'll have stuff like on their upper arms, they'll wear a helmet. Maybe they'll have, best case scenario, they'll have like a shoulder pad, but they're still going to have exposed chests, and they might have like stuff covering the top of their legs. But their heavy armor is more, it still leaves a pretty alarming amount of exposed skin, and skink poison just wrecks ogres. I mean, they're just in there going, and dead ogre. Except for, that times like a billion. Chameleon skinks would be an absolute nightmare for ogres, because the only ogres that are immune to poison are butchers and slaughtermasters, so they'd be fine, but their tribes would almost get immediately picked off. Not to mention dealing with horrific things like salamanders, which ogres have a lot of fat percentage, and if you've ever seen fire interact with fat, it's not a good time. And then, of course, you have things like pterodons and ripperdactyls would be a nightmare for certain parts of the ogre's army. Their Mournfangs and things like that would do really well, but if they're fighting the Lizardmen, it's probably because they're in the jungles of Lustria, or the Southlands, which means the Lizardmen have a lot of home turf advantage, it just doesn't go well for the ogres. That being said, if the ogres can achieve victory against a Lizardman army, they are set for weeks. They can if they can take down like a couple of stegodons, maybe a carnosaur, maybe a troglodyte, they got plenty of meat, and they're going to be eating good for a while. Plus, they can actually do pretty impressive stuff with the hides of large monsters to make like borderline magic items and other crazy stuff like that. Hermit Berg. This will be today's last question. What is the Ogre Kingdom's diplomatic standing with the Empire and the Dwarves? I know they used to have ogres as mercenaries, but how do they get those ogres as mercenaries? So, you know, as we've said, ogres are neutral with everybody. They're willing to work with anybody. But as for how they find them, usually what happens is ogres will wander. Whether it's an individual or a group of like man-eaters or a small tribe. They'll kind of just go wherever they feel like going. They'll just let their feet take them. And what usually happens is they will either run into travelers or signs or just a city that leads them to large hubs of civilization. And what they'll do is generally, if they can find someone they think is going to have money or just someone to talk to, they will either just talk to you or they will demonstrate their abilities. Either by curb stomping a local threat, whether it's like beastmen or some kind of minor monster or, you know, the undead or whatever. Like, they'll mess something up in very full view and as noisily and obnoxiously as they can to basically be like, ah, look how powerful we are. And usually after those displays, it takes a particularly stubborn or hateful army commander not to look at that and go, we should probably hire those guys because they're going to make a really good contingent or bodyguard or whatever in our army. Especially if they've got like some of the scarier stuff like Mournfang Riders or Lead Belchers and stuff like that. So a lot of people just tend to kind of hire them on the spot as they just run into them. And ogres are not stupid. You know, they will beeline to major population centers, whether it's Altdorf, Cologne, Dwarfholds, or the Southern Realms, Tilia, Estalia, the Border Princes, Araby. They'll travel the world looking for settlements, looking for the people who live there and being like, hey, if you give me food and gold, I'll work for you. I'll do anything you want. As long as, you know, I'll do your fighting for you because I'm really good at fighting. Not a lot of stuff can hurt me, and I feel really confident about that. So we can work something out here. Because the important thing to note about ogres is while they can be bullies, and while they can be absolute jerks who will just ruin your A1 day, most of the time, especially as individuals, ogres are looking for the path of least resistance. So they're going to be looking for a steady income of gold or food that's reliable and that they can do the minimum amount of effort. So if you have an ogre who's, you know, shows off and you come up to him and you're like, hey, I'll give you a handful of gold every day to be my bodyguard and to make sure nobody hurts me and just do what I tell you to, the ogre's like, got it. Like, I'm in. And he'll stick to his contract very, very well, so long as somebody else doesn't, like, one-up your pricing. But even then, it's pretty rare for an ogre to, like, be sinister about it. You know, an ogre isn't going to be shopping around. Once he's got a job, and he's going to do it. And if somebody were to walk up to him and be like, hey, I'll pay you all this extra stuff for you to, like, turn on that guy and kill him, most ogres probably won't do it because they have enough sense to know that's bad for business. You know, they want to be advertised as a reliable bodyguard, someone that's not going to backstab you. That's something that makes, like, Golgfag Maneater such a unique character among ogres, is Golgfag is clever enough to think, I'm going to take the money for the job you want me to do, then I'm also going to raid your baggage train on my way out. which is why a lot of people hate Maneater and are trying to kill him. But he is very, very crafty for an ogre and is very good at daring escapes and other weird shenanigans, which is why he's so delightful. But yeah, hope that answered y'all's questions for today. I've got a lot more of these already answered, so oh my gosh, we will just keep trucking. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you tomorrow for more Ogre Kingdoms Q&A, and I'm working on some other stuff that'll be coming out soon. So, yeah. Have a good day, guys.